Hi, and welcome to another episode of The Lowest Crime, where we explore some of the most notorious and captivating criminal cases from the Netherlands, and today, even Belgium. I am Eline, and today we'll dive into a chilling story about sabotage, jealousy, and a tragic death within a small skydiving community. This case is not only intriguing because of what happened, but also because of the difficulties faced in the trial that followed. This is the story of Els van Doren, otherwise known as the parachute murder. Before we begin, please note that today's episode contains descriptions of a fatal accident and other sensitive topics that may be disturbing to some listeners. And of course, I always try my very best to bring you all the known facts, but I am just an amateur podcast creator, so there is always a chance of me making a mistake. So, let's get started. It was a peaceful afternoon in the small Belgian town of Opglabeek on November 18th, 2006. A local woman was quietly hanging her laundry in the garden when out of nowhere a horrifying crash pierced the air. A figure plummeted from the sky, slamming into the ground with incredible force. The woman, in shock, ran toward the figure, realizing it was a skydiver who had fallen at deadly speed. There was nothing to be done. The person was already gone. The victim was 38-year-old Els van Doren, an experienced skydiver and member of the Zwartberg parachuting club in Belgium. Els had completed over 2,300 jumps in her career and was known for her talent and dedication to the sport. She had a reputation of being meticulous and professional when it came to her skydiving gear. However, that day, what seemed like a routine jump turned into a tragedy that would soon unfold into one of the most notorious criminal cases Belgium had ever seen. Outside of her passion for skydiving, Els was a wife and a mother. She lived with her husband Jan and their 2 children in the small town of Ranst. Together, they ran a successful jewelry business. But despite this seemingly perfect family life, Els had been leading a double life. She had been engaged in an affair with Marcel Somers, a 41-year-old skydive instructor from Eindhoven, the Netherlands. Their affair had begun 6 years earlier at the Zwartberg parachuting club. Marcel was respected in the skydiving community for his skill and charm, and his relationship with Els had grown over the years. While their affair remained a secret from her family, Els had no intention of leaving her husband or disrupting her home life. To her, the affair was confined to the skydiving club. But Els wasn't the only one involved with Marcel. There was a third person in the mix, 22-year-old Els Klottemans, who went by the nickname Babs. Babs was relatively new to skydiving, having joined the Zwartberg club only 2 years earlier. Unlike Els van Doren, Babs was not yet an experienced skydiver. In fact, her first jump had ended disastrously when she got stuck in a tree and had to be rescued by firefighters. This incident made her somewhat of a local legend, albeit for the wrong reasons. Despite her rocky start, Babs eventually became close friends with Els. But what Els did not know was that Babs had also become involved with Marcel. While Babs spent Friday nights at Marcel's apartment in Eindhoven, Els would visit him on the weekends. Although Els was not aware of Marcel seeing Babs as well, Babs was very well aware that she was not the only one. She was also painfully aware that Els was Marcel's number 1, and although she was welcome to stay the night on Fridays, Els would always come first to Marcel. On the night of November 17th, 2006, the night before Els's deadly fall, Els, Marcel and Babs all found themselves together at Marcel's apartment in Eindhoven. Normally, Fridays were Babs' time with Marcel, but this evening was different. Els had arrived unexpectedly after finishing a day's work at the jewelry store. Dressed in her work attire, her sudden appearance was an unwelcome surprise for Babs. They all stayed in Marcel's place together, with Babs sleeping in the living room and Els spending the night in Marcel's bed. The apartment was small, and there was no way for Bubs to escape the intimacy that unfolded between Marcel and Els that night. Lying alone on the couch, Bubs' feelings of rejection and jealousy festered. What had once been an awkward friendship between the two women was now becoming something really ugly. The following morning, Saturday, November 18th, the three of them, along with a fourth skydiver named Tom, headed to the Zwartberg parachuting club. The weather was poor that morning, so the group spent the early hours waiting for the skies to clear. During this time, Els bought a new skydiving pass, which allowed her to complete 100 more jumps, a sign that she had no intention of putting herself in harm's way or ending her life that weekend. By midday, the weather cleared up, and the group received the go-ahead for their 4,000-meter freefall jump. Els, Bubs, Marcel and Tom boarded the aircraft together, preparing for an intricate formation jump known as an Admon Audis. Admon Audis is a complex formation maneuver in freefall. In such formations, the skydivers link hands or legs and create intricate shapes while plummeting towards the earth at high speeds. It's a thrilling but highly precise skill that requires teamwork and trust. Every skydiver plays a specific role to ensure the formation is completed smoothly. For Els, this was nothing new. She was a seasoned pro, someone you'd trust completely to hold her place in such formations. As the plane ascended, the tension from the previous night was likely still simmering, but nothing outwardly indicated that this jump would be anything out of the ordinary. The plan was to execute their formation, a complex maneuver that required perfect timing. Els, ever cautious, had placed the parachute in the car earlier that day, as she often did to ensure its safety. However, no amount of precaution could save her from what would happen next. Marcel, Tom and Els exited the plane in sequence, performing their jumps as planned. Bubs, however, hesitated at the door of the aircraft, delaying her jump by several critical seconds. This hesitation threw off the group's timing and left Bubs trailing behind as the others began their freefall. Bubs tried to catch up by changing her positioning, but was unable to. As Els hurtled through the sky, she reached for her ripcord to deploy her parachute. But to her growing horror, nothing happened. Her main parachute failed to open, and in a state of panic she pulled the handle of her backup chute, but that too failed. She was now left plummeting towards the ground at over 200 kilometers per hour, with no way to stop her descent, leaving her to crash next to the woman hanging her laundry in the town of Oplabbeek. When paramedics and police arrived, it was clear that there was nothing they could do. Els was already dead. The impact had been catastrophic. Both her main and backup parachutes were found tangled and shredded, clearly not functioning as they should have. Rescue teams worked to cut open the parachute in a desperate but futile attempt to revive her. Initially, Elsa's death was treated as a tragic accident, a rare but not impossible failure of both the main and the backup chutes. However, as investigators took a closer look at the parachutes, they began to notice something wasn't right. Both the main and the backup chutes had been tampered with. Specifically, the bridle line connecting the main parachute to the pilot chute had been deliberately cut. The backup parachute had also been sabotaged in a way that would ensure that it would not be able to deploy. A very tragic detail in the case is that parachutes are always professionally packed by someone called a parachute rigger, and this would actually have been Elsa's last jump before a rigger was scheduled to repack her parachute, an appointment she had already scheduled. If she hadn't jumped that day, if the weather hadn't cleared up, the rigger would for sure have found out about the sabotage. And with this shocking discovery, Elsa's death turned from a tragic accident to a murder investigation. The nature of the sabotage indicated that whoever had tampered with the parachutes possessed a detailed knowledge of skydiving equipment. This knowledge narrowed the pool of suspects considerably, as only a handful of people at the club had the necessary experience to access the parachutes. At the center of the investigation were three key suspects: Jan, Elsa's husband, Marcel, her lover, and Babs, her friend, and Marcel's other lover. Jan, Else's husband, was the first to be questioned. He had no idea about Else's affair with Marcel, and had always believed his marriage to be solid. And with that, the only possible motive for Jan to harm his wife was eliminated, so he was quickly ruled out as a suspect. Next, attention turned to Marcel. As Else's lover and a key figure in the love triangle, Marcel's behavior following the accident raised suspicions. What was particularly strange is that when he was one of the first to arrive at the site of where Else had fallen, one of the first things he did was delete a message from Else's phone. The message had read, "You are my number one." When questioned about it, Marcel explained that he had deleted the message to spare Jan further pain, as he didn't want him to discover the extent of their affair. While this explanation seems reasonable, it cast a shadow over Marcel's actions. However, despite his involvement with both women and his questionable behavior, there was no direct evidence linking Marcel to the sabotage. This left Babs Klottemans. Babs had been present during the jump and had hesitated at the door of the plane, potentially witnessing the sabotage in action from a different vantage point. Her behavior in the days following Else's death only deepened investigators' suspicions. One day after the accident, on November 19th, Babs made a startling discovery. While driving near the Zwartberg parachuting club, she claimed to have spotted a small black object hanging 22 meters high in a tree. This object turned out to be Else's missing pilot chute, a critical piece of evidence that search teams had failed to find. Babs, however, had located it with surprising ease, while professionals looking for days had been unable to. This discovery raised immediate questions. How had Babs managed to find the pilot chute so effortlessly when trained search teams had searched for days without results? And why had she called Marcel instead of the police upon making the discovery? Investigators began to suspect that Babs had known the location of the pilot chute all along, and had only discovered it when it was convenient for her. Due to her delayed jump from the plane, it was possible that she saw where it landed. Adding to the suspicions, Babs had lied about the exit from her plane during the jump. She claimed that when she had exited later, she had tried to catch up by adjusting her body position. However, data from the jump contradicted this theory, suggesting that Babs had deliberately delayed her exit and hadn't tried to catch up at all. Investigators also reviewed footage from Else's helmet camera, which showed a red or orange-looking object during her fall. Initially, they believed that this object had to be connected to the sabotage, prompting an exhaustive search of rooftops, gutters, and surrounding debris for the mystery object. Despite their efforts, nothing was found, and 10 months later, investigators determined that the red object had actually been a trick of the light. Marcel's red jumpsuit had flashed across the camera lens in the background, creating the illusion of something unusual. So, valuable time and resources were wasted on an object that hadn't even existed in the first place. By January 2007, the investigation had narrowed in on Babs. On January 29, 2007, Babs Klottemans was arrested and charged with murder. The case against her, however, was all circumstantial. There was no physical evidence such as fingerprints or DNA linking her directly to the sabotage. But her lies, strange behavior, and the mounting circumstantial evidence painted a compelling picture for the investigators. Babs's mental health was also brought into question during the investigation. She had a history of depression and low self-esteem, struggles that were exacerbated by her turbulent relationship with Marcel. Psychological experts diagnosed her with narcissistic personality disorder and psychopathic traits, including a lack of empathy and manipulative behavior. These traits, combined with her obsession with Marcel and her jealousy of Else, provided investigators with a motive for murder. But without concrete evidence, the prosecution would have to rely on psychological profiling and Babs's erratic behavior to prove her guilt. Babs Klottemans' trial began in 2010, nearly 4 years after the tragic death of Els van Doren. The case had by then become a media sensation, not just in Belgium but internationally, captivating the public with its mix of betrayal, sabotage and tragedy. Dubbed the parachute murder case, it was covered extensively, even as far away as in Japan, drawing intense scrutiny on the proceedings. The prosecution's case hinged on Babs's jealousy and her alleged desire to eliminate Els, who she saw as an obstacle in her relationship with Marcel. They painted a picture of Babs as emotionally unstable, driven by obsessive jealousy and prepared to go to extreme lengths to remove her romantic rival. They showed how Babs had previously made anonymous phone calls to Els and Marcel from a phone booth somewhere in Mechelen, mostly calls where she wouldn't say anything but would pretty much immediately hang up. Babs had also sent an anonymous note to Els at her home address, stating something along the lines of, "What the hell are you doing to your husband and children?" The prosecution argued that Babs had sabotaged Els's parachutes, knowing it would be nearly impossible to detect and that she could easily distance herself from the act. The defense countered by emphasizing the lack of hard evidence. No fingerprints, no DNA, and no witnesses directly tying Babs to the sabotage. They argued that the case against her was built entirely on circumstantial evidence and questioned the integrity of the investigation. The defense also introduced the concept of tunnel vision, suggesting that investigators had prematurely focused on Babs and ignored other potential suspects, including Marcel. Dutch legal psychologist Peter van Koppe, a renowned expert in his field, was brought in as a defense witness to support this theory. Van Koppe argued that the police had failed to properly investigate alternative explanations for the sabotage and had zeroed in on Babs because of her affair with Marcel. One of the arguments the defense made was that the police had focused on Babs based on the assumption that only someone with extensive skydiving knowledge would have been able to sabotage the parachute. However, it was later shown that it would have been very easy for someone to sabotage it in the same way, even without skydiving knowledge. This opens up the investigation to way more suspects apart from Jan, Marcel and Babs. Van Koppe pointed out that the other suspects, including Marcel and Jan, had been dismissed way too quickly, and the investigation had been biased towards Babs' guilt rather than exploring all possibilities. After weeks of testimony and legal wrangling, the jury deliberated on the case. Although in the Netherlands they don't work with a jury, in Belgium they do, and on May 20th, 2010, the jury delivered its verdict. Babs Klottemans was found guilty of murder with premeditation. Despite the defense's arguments about the lack of concrete evidence, the jury was convinced by the circumstantial evidence, Babs' suspicious behavior, and the psychological profile presented by the prosecution. Babs was sentenced to 30 years in prison. The court took into account her young age and the lack of a previous criminal record when determining her sentence. However, the verdict was controversial. Many observers felt that Babs had been convicted based on circumstantial evidence alone, without the hard proof typically required in a murder case. The debate about whether justice had truly been served would linger long after the trial concluded. In the years since the trial, the parachute murder case had continued to be a source of public debate and speculation. While Babs was convicted, there are still many who believe that the case against her was built on weak evidence. Her conviction raised important questions about the role of psychological evidence and circumstantial evidence in criminal trials, specifically when no forensic evidence ties the accused to the crime. Babs Klottemans continues to maintain her innocence. Under Belgian law, she could be eligible for early release after serving part of her sentence, particularly if she shows remorse and takes responsibility for her actions. However, her ongoing refusal to admit guilt has complicated her chances for early release. She has filed multiple appeals, but as of now, her conviction stands. What do you all think? Is Babs guilty or not? I'd love to hear your opinions. But for now, that concludes this episode. Thank you all so much for listening, and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. And don't forget to follow The Lowest Crime on Instagram to find all images related to the case. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.